I'm Dr. Jeff Kelshevsky, forensic psychologist. Welcome to my YouTube channel in forensic psychology. Recently, I received an email with a question from one of the subscribers that I thought would make a good video. I'll read the email and paraphrase a bit. It says, "Hello and thank you for your channel. My question is about sexual sadism. And that is, do you think it can stem from feeling lust at a very early age before you even know that sex exists? So you don't have the optional outlet of fantasizing about sex with who you desire, so instead you fantasize about a particular way of seeing that person and you desire to hurt or humiliate them. That's how it is for me." This person goes on to describe how they're a straight male in their 40s. "I began feeling lust when I was 7 years old, probably sooner, and I was a Rocky fan. A scene that struck in my memory was a slow motion scene of Rocky punching Ivan Drago's belly until Drago's abs couldn't take it anymore, which to me looked humiliating. And since then, till this day, it's been a lifelong fetish where I enjoy seeing women sexually I admire fold over, either in the boxing ring or the wrestling ring, or when they get the wind knocked out of them." And he goes on to describe some of the other television shows and movies that he finds stimulating, I guess you could say. And then he writes, "I imagine Carl Jung would have something interesting to say about it. Anyway, apart from that, I'm a fairly decent guy who doesn't want to hurt anyone and doesn't hurt anyone." Thanks for the question. So let's start out with a definition. So in general, sexual sadism is defined as experiencing sexual arousal in response to pain, suffering, and humiliation of other people. Sometimes this is called sadomasochism. So we will focus on sexual sadism as a sexual appetite, something that turns someone on. What causes it? A number of years ago, a quite well-known psychologist and researcher, Martin Seligman, for all you Psych 101 students, remember him? He did the learned helplessness theory of depression by shocking dogs. Look it up, it's actually pretty interesting stuff. Anyway, Seligman wrote about what he called sexual imprinting. Now, he just wrote about this as something he suspected, but he didn't do any empirical research on it. Sexual imprinting is this concept that our sexual arousal appetites can be learned by early life experiences. He tied his theory of this towards the development of homosexuality as a learned behavior. Now, there's been a lot of subsequent robust research that shows that homosexuality, particularly in males, is not likely a learned behavior, and for most of the people who identify as exclusively homosexual. Now, based on his theory, there's this idea that a young child would have some kind of profound experience at an early age where they would experience sexual arousal for the first time, and they would associate that sexual arousal with something in their appetite. Now, I can tell you some anecdotal stories that kind of fall in line with this sexual imprinting. I've seen several people over the years that have a sexual fetish for spanking. And I mean, they're really into it. They get a lot of sexual gratification out of spanking. Now, some of these people have described to me discovering this in their childhood when they became sexually aroused when they were being spanked for disciplinary reasons, and this carried on until their adult years. And I had a pretty wild case a number of years ago. I evaluated a serial killer. Well, he was sort of a burgeoning serial killer, kind of just getting started. I think he killed 2 people, and then he tried to kill one guy who escaped, and he subsequently got arrested. Anyway, this guy lived what looked like a normal life. He was married, he was a long-haul truck driver, lived in a small town, but for several years he had this habit of picking up young male prostitutes and tying them to beds in certain ways. Now, he told me that he believed that this began when he was 8 years old. He was an older guy, and he used to go to the movie theater to see Lone Ranger episodes. And he talked about when he was 8 years old, he saw one episode where the Lone Ranger had a sidekick who was a teenage boy. And this sidekick, there was a scene where the Lone Ranger burst into this house to save him, and he is tied to a bed in a certain way. The person who I saw said that this changed his life, quote, end quote. and that this was a fetish he took on for the rest of. But this idea of sexual imprinting, which doesn't really have a lot of research behind it, doesn't explain a lot or all of the sexual sadism that you may see. Well, as you can imagine, it's much more complicated than just one factor or one idea. Most of the research can really only point to potential factors associated with development of sexual sadism, not being able to establish that there's a standard cause. So sexual sadism likely develops from different factors for different people. They found three kinds of factors. One is neurobiological factors. And these are from studies that show that people who have sexual sadism also often have increased activation in certain areas of the brain as compared to most people. For example, there was a research study on sexually violent offenders, which found that there was heightened amygdala action, which is often implicated in sexual arousal, much higher in these individuals as compared to most people. Second factor the research talks about is psychological or early life experiences. The research shows that some individuals who develop sexual sadism have significant histories of abuse and neglect in childhood. But as you can imagine, some people who develop this don't. So there's some research that talks about early sexual experiences that involve behaviors associated with sexual sadism, like coercion, humiliation, and pain, and that this becomes an appetite for the person moving on, kind of like the imprinting argument. The third is sociocultural, and this would include exposure to media or others who normalize and eroticize violence in association with sexual activities. Think about what kind of pornography a young child could fall on, and how this could influence them. Now, the idea is that sexual sadism is complicated, right? And it can develop from a variety of factors. Now, when does it move on from being a sexual appetite to being a problem? Well, the DSM-5 does have a diagnosis for sexual sadism disorder. And the difference between it being a sexual appetite versus a disorder is when it becomes a disorder is when this appetite causes problems in the person's life, causes problems in their relationship, or when the particular behavior or object involved in the fetish must be present in order for sexual arousal or sexual performance to occur. So the bottom line with sexual sadism, it's a pretty complicated term. There are complicated factors. It's important to understand when this is something that's a sexual appetite versus when it moves into a disorder and can cause problems. And again, this is also sometimes part of these violent crimes and serial killers and things that we study. All right, well, if this is a topic that interests you or you know others who would interest, pass this video along to others. Subscribe to the channel, like, comment. Please send me more emails with your questions that I can do videos on. I'm also on other social media outlets, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, X, and everything is under Dr. Jeff Kalashevsky, forensic psychologist. Thanks.